The reason they stopped moving wasn't because Jin-Woo had disappeared. It was because the mage controlling them had to pause their spellcasting to use Eyes of Detection. And if Jin-Woo's hunch was right, he was about to find out. He sprang into action, ducking under the knight's grasp and making a wild dash toward the mage. Along the way, he leaped from one knight's head to another, using them like stepping stones. The mage's panic was palpable. Jin-Woo could sense it growing with every step. The chanting got faster. The knights quickly switched from fighting to forming a protective circle around the mage. Whatever was about to happen was almost here. He pounced, landing right in front of the mage. Without wasting a second, he plunged his dagger into its heart. Fatal strike. The mage disappeared without a sound, vanishing into a puff of black smoke. You have defeated a mage. At the exact same moment, the knights who had been attacking Jin-Woo collapsed to the ground like puppets with their strings cut. Clunk, clunk. The room was filled with suits of armor lying all over the place. Jin-Woo felt a surge of excitement inside. He'd been right. After nearly being killed several times, he'd finally figured it out. The knights in armor weren't the real danger. It was the mages controlling them who were the actual threat. Jin-Woo had just used his weapon, the Night Killer, to take down a mage for the first time. He couldn't help but laugh at how strange it felt. It wasn't a knight he'd defeated, but a mage. The robes the mage had been wearing now lay crumpled on the floor. For a moment, Jin-Woo felt confident again, like he was back in control. But there was no time to feel proud. He had to keep going. The adventure wasn't done yet. The ground rumbled and shook as Jin-Woo turned to face a wave of knights closing in on him. That meant there must be more mages hiding somewhere. Controlling these puppet warriors, the knights lunged at him one after another. But Jin-Woo's arm flashed like lightning. A swoosh. With one swift swing, he sliced through the first line of attackers, cutting them down instantly. Jin-Woo's eyes widened in amazement. Whoa, that 800,000 gold was totally worth it. The Night Killer sliced through the armor like it was nothing more than paper. And it wasn't just because of the sawtooth blade. This dagger was made specifically for taking down armored opponents. Jin-Woo could even feel a surge of magic coming from it. He had no idea store-bought weapons were this good. Most people thought you should only buy from shops if you had no other choice. But now Jin-Woo realized that wasn't true at all. At the very least, this was way better than the standard gear hunters usually got. Gold just became a whole lot more important. He could also make a lot of money by buying weapons from the shop and selling them to other hunters for a higher price. Unlike items you can only use once, there was no rule stopping him from giving or selling weapons to someone else. Focus, I need to focus. This wasn't the time to get sidetracked. More knights kept coming at Jin-Woo like a never-ending wave. He swung his sword hard, taking them down a few at a time. But no matter how many he defeated, more just kept coming. With a swift swing, he took down another knight. Jin-Woo quickly leaped onto the shoulder of one that had fallen and sprang upward. Stealth, he shouted, and in an instant he faded away into thin air. Of course, Jin-Woo wasn't trying to hide. He was on the hunt. Suddenly, a shrill alarm zinged through the air from every direction. Apeen. Ping. Leaped from one knight's head to another, scanning for the glowing eye symbols that marked the mages. There were 5 mages in total. Jin-Woo locked onto the closest one. As soon as his eyes met the mages, the mage shouted commands, and knights rushed to shield it. But Jin-Woo was too fast. With a swift flick of his wrist, Kasaka's venom fang zoomed out of his left hand, and struck the mage right between the eyes. With a loud "Akang," Pet's notification flashed. You learned skill, dagger throw. You have defeated a mage. With that hit, hundreds more knights crumpled to the ground. 4 mages left. Akang didn't waste a second. He leaped off one knight's head and bounded toward his next target. Jin-Woo glanced back at Kasaka's venom fang, still lying where he'd left it. Time to try out his new skill, Ruler's Hand. Reaching out, the dagger zoomed toward him like a magnet. Whoa! He caught it midair. No need to backtrack, for his weapon meant he could keep moving, without missing a beat. In an instant, Jin-Woo closed in on the next mage. Before it could even flinch, his sword struck true. You have defeated a mage. The knights were dropping fast, now only a handful remained. Victory was within reach, and Jin-Woo's determination burned brighter than ever. Just 3 more mages stood in his way. Sensing danger, the mages bunched together, and the remaining knights tightened their formation as well. The mages started chanting together. their eerie voices echoing through the room as they cast their spell. Eric, Kirk. The knights guarding them suddenly collapsed like they were being squashed by an invisible giant press. Then, in a flash, they transformed into one massive steel golem. It locked its gaze onto Jin-Woo right away. Kirk. Jin-Woo couldn't believe the intense pressure he felt from this monster. But weirdly enough, he wasn't scared of it. Jin-Woo had faced death so many times that he felt more excited than scared. The ground rattled with every step the golem took. It was a force to be feared. Swoosh! Jin-Woo quickly dodged the monster's punch. The metal fist barely missed him, smashing into a stone pillar and breaking it in two. Yeah, it's super scary, Jin-Woo said with a grin. But, I've got this. If Jin-Woo hadn't solved the puzzle of what was happening here, he might have been in big trouble. But since he knew what was going on, he wasn't worried at all. Just as the golem was about to bring its huge fist crashing down, Jin-Woo made a bold move. Instead of backing away, he dashed straight at the monster. In a flash, he darted between the golem's legs and popped up right behind it. As the golem spun around, Jin-Woo quickly stepped in front of the mages, who were now defenseless. Their eyes widened in fear, and they trembled with dread. Jin-Woo smiled, feeling victorious, because the mages' unity had backfired. They were easier to defeat when clustered together. With swift swings of his daggers, he struck them down one by one. Each mage dissolved into black smoke, defeated. You have defeated a mage. You have defeated a mage. You have defeated a mage. The mages vanished, just as the others had, leaving Jin-Woo triumphant in the aftermath. The golem that had been grabbing at Jin-Woo turned into sand and vanished. But Jin-Woo stayed on high alert. Was it really over? Or was there more coming? Just to be safe, he kept his guard up until he heard the sound of a notification. Peewing. Jin-Woo froze, holding his breath. But instead of another monster appearing, the system announced, the job change quest has ended. All monsters in the trial room have been defeated. It went on, your job will be assigned soon. Depending on how far you've come, you might even get a class upgrade. Only then did Jin-Woo let out a deep sigh of relief. Woo. It had been a tough battle, but if he had been too worried about the instant teleportation stone, he probably would have been thinking about making a quick escape. Luckily he had lost the stone, which forced him to focus on fighting these monsters instead. Jin-Woo had totally crushed it. His hard work was about to pay off. He glanced at the timer. It was stuck on 4:29:16, 4.5 hours in that dungeon, and he made it through alive. But here's the kicker. This wasn't just about surviving. Nope. Jin-Woo took it up a notch by taking down every single monster. Boom. He started to worry about how many points he had racked up, and what kind of job that would get him. The system assigns jobs based on your actions, so if his decisions were good ones, he hoped he wouldn't end up in a class that would cause problems. This way, the trouble he worried about might not happen after all. He was thankful for that. No matter where the player went, death itself seemed to follow. Every path they took was lined with bodies, and the smell of blood lingered. The words were tough to hear, but he couldn't really argue with them. It was all part of leveling up. But he'd gone on non-stop monster-slaying marathons, in instance dungeons, until he couldn't level up anymore. And in regular dungeons, he'd hunted down every last tiny magic creature, leaving no corner unexplored, and no challenge untouched. Even though he never meant for it to happen, Jin-Woo had clashed with other hunters more than once. Phrases like angel of death, corpses, and the stench of blood kept coming up, and no matter how you looked at it, they all pointed to one thing. He seemed born to be an assassin-class hunter. Plus the player craved great power and blazed his own trail without relying on others. Jin-Woo nodded, knowing it was true. He mostly agreed with what the system said. At first he didn't have anyone to work with, but he was confused about why all of this was part of a job change analysis. The system kept going. Since you really want power and can bring back the dead, it said you'll have an army of undead soldiers who only take orders from you. Jin-Woo couldn't believe what he was hearing. Before he could even argue, the system announced his results in its usual calm tone. Your job is necromancer. Jin-Woo was stunned. Jin-Woo's eyes were glued to the screen, his mind racing. Everything had pointed to him becoming an assassin. So where did a micromancer even come from? He blinked hard, half expecting the words to change, but they stayed the same. Your job is necromancer. At first came confusion, then a wave of anger. Why now? Jin-Woo muttered. He'd never really focused on his intelligence stat, so why was this happening to him? Out of all the mage-class hunters in the world, why did he get stuck with one of the rarest and weirdest jobs out there? It just didn't make sense. Jin-Woo had always been a fighter ever since he became an E-rank hunter. He stuck to daggers and never touched the steel sword. All his skills screamed one thing: assassin. That's what he was meant to be, or so he thought. Then out of nowhere he got assigned to be a mage, specifically, a necromancer. Jin-Woo knew a bit about classes from video games, and he had a rough idea of what necromancers did. But him, a necromancer. It didn't add up. Two gloomy mages stood in front of him, their dark robes tattered, and their faces pale. Behind them marched an army of shambling zombies, their vacant eyes fixed on Jin-Woo. He couldn't see how someone like them could be connected to him. It just didn't make sense. Jin-Woo scowled and shook his head, trying to process it all. Okay, I need to chill out, he told himself. His mind was a mess right now, but he had to stay calm. Keeping his cool was one of his strongest weapons. As his anger faded, Jin-Woo calmed down and realized something. It felt familiar. This reminded him of those 5 stages of grief people go through when they get terrible news. First comes denial, then anger. What's next? Bargaining, right? He wondered if he could cut a deal or find some compromise with the system. But deep down, Jin-Woo knew there was no room for cutting deals here. If there was one cool perk to being a necromancer, it would be this. He could supposedly lead his own army. But let's be real, that army would be made up of skeletons and rotting corpses. If he strolled around with that kind of undead entourage trailing behind him, people would totally lose it. It's not exactly the most subtle thing in the world. Plus, those creepy followers would probably give everyone a serious case of the heebie-jeebies. People feared hunters as much as they admired them, and now the system wanted Jin-Woo to become one of these powerful leaders, commanding an army of undead. He wasn't sure if this was the right fit for him, or if he could even handle it. Suddenly a message popped up. Chugong, will you accept this job? The system was waiting for his answer. At least he got to choose. Jin-Woo sighed in relief. If the system wasn't forcing him to take it, that probably meant other chances would come his way. No need to overthink it. Jin-Woo grinned to himself as he turned down the offer. No, he said firmly. But then the system asked again. Necromancer is a hidden class. Are you sure you want to decline? This time the question didn't feel so simple. His answer caught in his throat, and he hesitated. He paused before answering. A hidden class. It sounded like something straight out of a video game. But he knew hunters with unique abilities were real. He'd heard stories about one hunter who could create shields and another who could boost their team's strength. There was even talk about Unofficial, the leader of the White Tiger Guild, who could supposedly transform into a magic beast. Hunters with special powers were snatched up by big guilds and got all sorts of perks. So if a hidden class was something like that, maybe it wasn't such a bad idea to accept. The system's words popped into his head. It had suggested the necromancer job because he wanted great power. That must mean necromancers were really powerful. Most people with special powers were just supporters, so this was exciting news. Jin-Woo's power was meant for battle. He started to get really pumped up. He wished he knew what being a necromancer was really like. It would make choosing easier. But things are never that simple, right? Jin-Woo couldn't just snap his fingers and make things go his way. Plus, he'd never heard of a hunter with powers like this before. How could a mage control an army and fight on the battlefield at the same time? He didn't even need to finish that thought. Whoa, Jin-Woo stared at what was left of the knights around him. Those mages, they must have been showing off their necromancer powers during that job change quest. Wait a minute, could it be? The knights were their armies, no question about it. Battling them wasn't easy, especially since they charged into battle without caring if they lived or died. If Jin-Woo hadn't figured out how to take them down, or if the mages had been tougher fighters, well, instead of all these busted up pieces of metal scattered around, Shinan might be the one lying on the ground. Jin-Woo turned away from the knights and lifted his head, moving on from the battlefield. His eyes gleamed with excitement. A fighter, he thought. That's what set him apart from mages. Sure, some mages could handle themselves in a fight, but if one of them could also lead an entire army, wouldn't that be terrifying for their enemies? And who knows, maybe even more than that, he had always wanted to conquer a B-rank dungeon or higher on his own. Jin-Woo's throat tightened at the thought. If he kept leveling up after becoming a necromancer, his minions would get stronger too. The possibilities were mind-blowing. I wouldn't be the only one getting stronger. His army would level up too. Is that even possible? Jin-Woo got chills and looked up at the floating window. The message hung there waiting for his answer. Necromancer is a hidden class. Will you still decline? For once, the system wasn't pushing him to decide right away. Jin-Woo thought to himself, is this really what I wanted? Of course, there was no reply. After struggling with the decision, he finally made up his mind. If this was the path to power, he was all in. Jin-Woo didn't hold back this time. Yes, he said without a second thought. The system immediately buzzed with new messages. Kami Store, your job has been finalized. You might get the chance to move up a level based on how many advancement points you've earned. Starting calculations now. For calculating your advancement points. While the system was working things out, Jin-Woo started unwrapping the bandage on his right hand. His palm was red and swollen from gripping the dagger so tightly. Looks like I'm getting blisters, he said, wincing a bit. A drop of healing potion would fix this easily, but since he couldn't use potions right now, it was becoming a real hassle. He finished unwrapping the bandage, and was about to stash Night Killer in his inventory. When the notification pinged, Jin-Woo turned reflexively at the sound. You have exceeded the expected time limit. Bonus points will be awarded. Bonus points, huh? He had no idea what the time limit was, but he knew he'd lasted way longer than expected. A smug grin spread across Jin-Woo's face as more messages flooded in. You did not use the instant teleportation stone. Bonus points will be awarded. Bonus for HP is over 50%. Bonus points will be awarded. 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 Bonus points exceeded the achievement threshold. Bonus point. Bonus ears. But Jin-Woo barely noticed it. His mind was already stuck on one thing. A bonus special reward. Those words jumped out at him like a neon sign. Jin-Woo's eyes lit up when he saw the message about a super special reward. He quickly stopped what he was doing, his fingers hovering over the screen with excitement. More alerts started popping up one after another. Tapping. Your job has changed from Necromancer to Shadow Monarch. You have learned job-exclusive skills. You have acquired bonus stats. You have acquired title. The one who overcome adversity. Wait, what's a Shadow Monarch? Jin-Woo wondered, his brow furrowing in confusion. He hurriedly checked his stats to make sense of it all. Name. Tut Jin-Woo Sung. Tut level 5D1. Tut. Shadow Monarch. There it was. Instead of being a necromancer, he was now something entirely new, a Shadow Monarch. The system had mentioned that depending on his progress points, he could upgrade his class, but this was way beyond what he expected. Jin-Woo felt a surge of excitement, mixed with a bit of nervousness. What kind of powers did a Shadow Monarch have? He couldn't wait to find out, and start this new chapter in his gaming journey. It had also mentioned that his total advancement points had exceeded the achievement threshold. The end result was Shadow Monarch. Then was this the special reward the system was talking about? Jin-Woo was suddenly struck speechless. Something strange and inexplicable was happening before his very eyes. Past the message holograms, black smoke was exuding from the fallen knights littered on the ground. Nothing like this had ever happened before. Without their masters, these monster knights were just useless hunks of metal. But then, Jin-Woo closed the stat screen and looked around. It wasn't just one or two of them. Black smoke was rising from all the knights. Shadow extraction is possible. Shadow extraction is possible. Shadow extraction is possible. Every time he spotted a knight with black smoke, this message popped up. What did it even mean to extract a shadow? Jin-Woo had no idea, but the swirling smoke seemed to twist in pain, as if it were alive. It felt like they were calling out to him for help. Could those really be screams he heard? But Jin-Woo was totally sure he could rescue them from their suffering. Shadow extraction. Choose a command word for your skill. The system told him. Did he really have to pick it himself? Jin-Woo thought for just a second before blurting out. Arise. As soon as the word left his lips, Shend, moans filled the air, and the shadows of the knights began to twist and squirm, like they were alive. Jin-Woo looked around, trying to make sense of what was happening. The shadows around Jin-Woo were moving like crazy. Then, a black hand shot up from one of them. It slammed into the ground, and started pulling itself up. Jin-Woo's eyes almost popped out of his head. What the cunt? The thing looked human, but it was definitely not normal. It was more like a shadowy soldier climbing out of the darkness. One by one, knights in shiny black armor stepped out of the shadows. Jin-Woo blinked in surprise. By the time he snapped back to reality, there were tens of soldiers standing at attention around him. A message popped up, shadow extraction successful. Tens of knights surrounded him, and Jin-Woo couldn't believe his eyes. He walked over to the closest knight and touched its armor. It felt just like real metal. It wasn't just that they looked like armor. These were real knights, ready to charge into battle. They had human-like shapes, but something was off. Jin-Woo couldn't sense any sign of life in them. No breathing, no heartbeat. He froze, barely holding back a gasp. When he peered through the helmet's eye holes, it felt like staring into a deep, endless pit. Jin-Woo took a cautious step back, feeling like the darkness might pull him in. Was this thing really made of shadows? Curious, he opened up his skill window. Just as the system had mentioned, there were new job-exclusive skills waiting for him. Job exclusive skills, active skill, Shadow Extraction LV. 1. Shadow Storage LV. He decided to try the first one on the list. Skill Shadow Extraction LV. 1. Job exclusive skills. No mana required. Pulls out mana from those who have lost their lives, and turns it into a shadow soldier. Jin-Woo's eyes lit up with excitement as he jumped at the chance to test this new ability. He was fascinated by this strange yet powerful skill. The chances of failing to extract them go up, based on how strong they were and how much time has passed since their death. Active shadow extraction 30s. After reading that description, Jin-Woo's eyes widened as the truth hit him. They weren't normal soldiers at all. They were undead. These shadow soldiers were creatures pulled from the shadows of the dead. Jin-Woo gulped hard. If they were really going to be his army, he stretched out his right arm, his heart pounding with a mix of excitement and fear. The soldiers snapped sharply to their right, as if controlled by an invisible string. Jin-Woo held up his hand, and they froze, facing forward again. He stood in the middle of this disciplined group, lowering his hand to steady himself. Then came the deep thud of knees hitting the ground in perfect sync. Jin-Woo's eyes widened with a thrilled grin spreading across his face. Whoa, he blurted, clearly amazed. This was epic. The power at his fingertips was mind-blowing. He couldn't let this moment slip away, time to make the most of it. Jin-Woo could turn the monsters he'd beaten into his own soldiers, and there was one monster nearby. He really wanted to make join his crew. He climbed up onto the pile of armor that had once been an iron golem. From this higher spot, he could see the whole dungeon at once. Jin-Woo squinted, and then he saw it. Without wasting a second, he took off in that direction. Thump, 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 thump. His excitement made him move so fast, even without using dash. When he arrived, Jin-Woo's heart skipped a beat, as he stared at the lifeless body of the monster he wanted to use shadow extraction on. He gulped nervously. Jin-Woo found the knight exactly where he had left it, right there standing tall as Igris the Bloodred. The crimson armor was battered, showing just how intense their last fight had been. Jin-Woo approached cautiously, remembering how this very night had almost been his end, not so long ago. Now though, it was the key to something big. As he drew closer, Jin-Woo's eyes lit up. There it was, that familiar mist swirling off Igris like a signal. A smile spread across his face. This was perfect timing. He knew exactly what this meant. Shadow extraction was ready to go. With a deep breath, Jin-Woo reached out, eager to unlock the secrets Igris held.